When I learned my mother left everything to my spoiled brother in her will, I realized I was just a resource, not a daughter, so I cut all ties. In the middle of a calm Tuesday evening, my phone rang. "What's up? And how are you doing?" Only the voice of my mother, asking in a tone that was both flat and impatient, where her money was. Yes, that was it. She contacted me as if I were a mistake after she had done everything she could to cover my brother's payments, bills, and every excuse she could think of for him for an entire year. Neither of us argued. I did not provide an apology. The only thing I did was listen, and I felt something inside of me finally clicking into place. That phone call didn't hurt, that's why. This made everything much clearer. And the reality about it began a very long time before that particular event. Before I tell what happened next, I want you to touch the like button and comment on your city if you have ever spent money on family boundaries. I did not grow up with the notion that my family was dysfunctional. From the outside, it appeared as though we were just like any other family living in a peaceful American metropolis. A little home with a front yard that my mother made an effort to maintain in order. There were photographs of the family arranged in a row along the hallway, frozen smiles from various years that were almost telling the truth. The morning that my father passed away was the end of my true childhood. My age was 7. One moment, he was there, moving around the kitchen, filling the house with noise and warmth, and the next moment, the entire world was silent. After that, everything seemed empty, as if our house had an excessive number of rooms but not enough air throughout it. Not too long after she met James, my mother Linda survived by shutting off certain aspects of herself. This is a strategy that some individuals use to live. Although he was not very loud or charismatic, he was perceptive. It was noticeable to him when I paused in the middle of a statement. When I began doing my own laundry before I was tall enough to reach the machines comfortably, he took notice of my actions. The birth of my brother Ryan caused a change in the center of gravity in our home during that time. At first it wasn't very spectacular. It was just a few minor things. My requirements grew more adaptable. His became an urgent matter. The timing of dinners was determined by his disposition. Weekends were centered on the pursuit of his hobbies. When I was young, I realized that if I wanted to have serenity, I needed to be easy. James endeavored to maintain a sense of equilibrium. In order to prevent me from looking around the room and feeling like I was forgotten, he attended my school events, drove me to my martial arts courses, and sat on uncomfortable folding chairs during the entire process. Although my mother expressed gratitude for it, she did not alter her behavior in any way. Ryan had a sensitive mind. One of a kind was Ryan. He needed more. By the time I was a teenager, I had a firm grasp on the guidelines, even though no one had ever explicitly stated them to me. It was expected of me to be capable, self-sufficient, and appreciative of even the smallest amount of attention. Ryan was given permission to wander. When I left for college, I took a bag full of clothes with me and made a silent pledge to myself that I would not want permission from anyone in order to construct a life for myself. I was able to learn how to be consistent by working part-time jobs, skipping trips that I couldn't afford, and working. In a number of ways that he never openly expressed, James was proud of me. My mother allowed me to be fully independent. A number of years later, when James passed away unexpectedly, it was as if I had lost my father every single time. But I was able to see the implications of my actions this time. Because he was absent, there was no buffer. The fact that my mother had 2 children was silently brought to her attention. Around that time, the calls began to come in. At first there will be only little requests, and subsequently there will be more frequent ones. Due to the fact that this was what I had always done, I came forward without any trepidation. I also convinced myself that it was only a transitory situation for a while. Every time I went to the house after James passed away, it seemed to be getting smaller. In terms of the emotions, not the body. Despite the fact that the walls were the same, the air was heavier and thicker, with expectations that were not stated. No longer did my mother inquire about my well-being. She inquired as to whether or not I had the opportunity to assist throughout this month. It was always presented in a kind manner, as if it were a favor. Favors, on the other hand, do not occur in a predetermined pattern. I reassured myself that it was logical. She had reached an advanced age and was once again a widow. Ryan was trying to decipher the situation. That sentence turned out to be her defense. She always had an excuse ready for me whenever I inquired about the reasons why he was not working, why he was still living at home, and why he appeared to be so perfectly content doing nothing. His anxiety was high. He had a sensitive nature. He is not the kind of person that the world was designed for. As a result, I entered the picture. From the beginning, it was only enough to cover a few bills. After that, it turned into consistent payments. Things around the house that James would have handled without a second thought were brought to my attention by me. I put in a new refrigerator when the old one died. I paid to have the roof mended after it began to leak rainwater. My announcement was not made. I did not make a request for credit. As I always have done, I just carried out the tasks that were required of me. Ryan hardly acknowledged any of it for a moment. He also talked about goals that never seemed to come to fruition, played games, and slept much past his bedtime. Whenever we got together as a family, Dad would swipe through his phone as my mother stood close, ready to defend him against questions that no one might even ask. Whenever I dropped a suggestion that perhaps he could be of assistance, her tone immediately shifted. "You don't understand him," she would tell that person. "You never have." That was the moment when I began to experience something that went beyond the feeling of tiredness. Anger was not yet present. I had the feeling that I was being subtly relocated. Not as a daughter but as a resource. It was a low, persistent burn that I continued to feel. The defining moment did not present itself in the form of a yell or a fight. When it arrived, it was a typical afternoon during a visit that was intended to be brief. As if she were getting ready for something significant, my mother was arranging the material that she had accumulated at the kitchen table, which was covered in stacks of envelopes. When I asked her what she was working on, she responded that she was simply putting things in order while she did not glance up. The way that she expressed it caused a tightening sensation to develop in my stomach. During the time that I was applying gentle pressure, she brought up the will. It is not formal, and it is nearly informal. In her explanation, she stated that Ryan will eventually receive everything. The house, any savings that were still available, and everything else. She spoke it as if it were self-evident, as if it did not need any further explanation. I awaited the remainder, the portion of the speech in which she made reference to me. It was not her. I questioned her in a relaxed and thoughtful manner, and she sighed. I was told that there was no reason for me to be concerned because everything was going well. In contrast, Ryan would require stability, support and protection in order to function properly. When I was in that moment, my mind was filled with evidence that I had neglected, which consisted of years of minor sacrifices. The bills, the repairs, and the emotional labor that is required. My assistance was not required because I was required. Because I was supposed to, I was providing assistance. And all of a sudden, it seemed obvious. The issue at hand was neither love nor fairness. A sense of entitlement was at play. I did not respond in the manner that she most likely anticipated. It was not a heated debate. There was no raised voice, and there was no spectacular exit. I nodded, assisted her in reorganizing the documents into clean stacks, and concluded the visit as if nothing had changed with regard to the situation. In the whole of my journey back home, I scarcely turned on the radio. I desired the peace and quiet. Without her speech altering my ideas, I needed to hear my own thoughts for a very long time. In the middle of the night, I laid awake thinking about the talk. It was not the words themselves that were important. Rather, it was the tone, the certainty, and the manner in which she had already established my role in the family without ever asking me if I supported it. I came to a realization that caused a peculiar sense of calmness to arise in my chest. In my behavior, I had been acting as if I were a short-term solution to a long-term problem. I went back to see her again a few days after the initial visit. Even though a portion of me was already aware of what I was going to hear, I told myself that I needed clarification. We were seated at the kitchen table, which was the same table where I had completed my schoolwork when I was a child, while she was watching Ryan. I confronted her with the question of whether or not she truly believed that it was fair to leave everything to him. She didn't beg for a moment. "You're stronger," she said to me. I asked her if she knew what I meant when I said, "You always have been, you'll be fine." I was referring to the fact that I had been paying bills, covering expenditures, and stepping in whenever something broke or went wrong. As if I were listing duties rather than sacrifices, she dismissed it as if it were nothing. Her response was, "That is not the same." It was at that time that something shattered within of me. You chose to help. The change was not loud or abrupt. Rather, it was a subtle internal shift, similar to the way a support beam finally gives way after years of being under pressure. One last question that I posed to her was whether or not she loved us in the same way. However, she did not respond immediately. Whenever she did so, her remarks landed in a tidy and pointed manner. Apparently no one was in need of her anymore. The fact that her love was different due to the fact that the circumstances were different. There was no indication that she loved me less. She did not have to do it. Before I departed, I did not say my goodbyes. During the evening, I opened my banking application and gazed at the recurring transfer that I had established after James passed away. It was not the quantity that was important, but the fact that it was not a little number was. That was the meaning that it conveyed. There is permission, expectation, and control. I lingered over the screen for a longer period of time than I had anticipated. Rather than because I was uncertain, I was allowing myself to feel the weight of the decision that I was about to make. Then I decided to abort it. No announcement, no warning was given. It was neither my mother or my brother that I called or texted. I did not provide an explanation. I simply came to a halt. Following that, there was a hush that seemed foreign and somewhat perilous, much like the moment you take your first steps off of solid ground. Nevertheless, beneath that anxiety was something more stable, a sense of relief. I found myself not reacting for the very first time. I was making a decision. And I was aware that it wouldn't be long before they became aware of it. The time it took was precisely 2 months, not 3 weeks or 6 weeks. While I was in the process of preparing dinner, my phone suddenly lit up 60 days to the day after I had canceled the payments. It was because the pan was sizzling, the oil was popping quietly, and the aroma of garlic was pouring into my flat that I remember it. For the first time in a very long time, I was able to concentrate on the task at hand without feeling rushed or constantly calculating what the next bill would be. I was on the verge of not responding. The name that was displayed on the screen remained there as if it were a dare. After wiping my hands on a towel, I picked up the object. "I don't know where my money is," my mother asked. There was no greeting, no pause, and no affection. It was just that inquiry, which was harsh and immediate, like if I had failed to finish a transaction, entirely. The only sound I could hear was my own breathing as I stood there with my phone placed to my ear. The sounds that were known to me from her home could be heard in the background. There was a television that was turned up too high, and I could hear the faint clink of a bottle being laid down. There was another person present. She went on to say, "I was not successful in this transfer." A hint of irritation could be heard in her voice. It was there. "There must be a problem with your bank." There it was then. It was not a question like, "Are you okay?" or "Did something happen?" but rather a presumption that the money will come, as it always does. "It's not an issue at all," I confirmed. After that, there was a profound deafening quiet. I pictured her blinking and performing a recalculation. She inquired, "What exactly do you mean?" When she said, "I have bills due," I responded, "I canceled it." Very little. Her breath caught in her throat. In order to fill the void, fury flooded in at that moment. The volume of her voice increased as she asked, "You what?" I switched the burner off on my stove after looking down at it and saying, "You can't just do that. We depend on that money. You may wait for the food." This was not possible. I helped because I chose to, I explained to myself. An instantaneous change in her tone occurred when she said, "I'm not doing that anymore." Suddenly the annoyance was gone. Something familiar, something that had been rehearsed, appeared in its stead. The voice for the wounded. "Jessica, you know Ryan is going through a hard time," she remarked in response. I almost chuckled out loud at how predictable it was when he said, "This isn't about you." "No," I responded in a composed manner. Ryan's voice, which was far away but clear, became audible at that moment and said, "This is exactly about me." He was close enough to hear, close enough to comment. "What's her problem now?" he said to himself. Not even my mother lowered the volume of the phone. I said that, landing, "You're being dramatic. This is family. Family helps. Family does not draft a will, cutting out one child and expecting that child to fund the consequences." She snapped at him, "Don't start." And then brought her focus back to me. "You're being dramatic." Her tone became more firm. "You went through my things and you told me everything," she added, as if it were nothing at all. She let out a harsh lungful. "I did what I had to do. No one needs security, and I don't." I inquired about it. Not because she was unable to comprehend the question, but rather because she was unwilling to respond to it. There was a pause taken by her. She finally said, "You're doing fine." And she meant it. My eyes were closed as I listened to the words. "You have a good job. You are independent. You have always been." That was not a coincidence, I was able to say. With a sneer, she said, "That was survival." Ryan laughed in the background as he said, "Oh, don't turn this into something it's not." A brief sound that betrays disdain. When he said that, it was as if we owed you something. "You always think you're better than everyone else," he remarked. Something icy began to settle in my chest and I felt it. To be sure, not to be angry. I stated, "I don't think I'm better." And I meant it. At that moment, My mother lost her temper and said, "I think I'm done." She yelled out, "After everything I've done for you." And she meant it. I steadied myself by leaning against the counter and saying, "This is how you decide to repay me." "Tell me," I commanded. She stumbled over her words as she asked, "What exactly have you done for me lately?" Her words were tangled up with each other. After that, she was able to regain her balance. "I gave you life," she remarked to him then. "It was I who brought you up." "And I brought myself up," I responded. "You taught me how to disappear quietly. Congratulations." "I learned the lesson," she said with a voice that was low and menacing. "You're selfish," I grinned. But she couldn't see it. "I understand." "No," I clarified. There was movement on her end of the line, a door opening, and at that moment she said, "I'm setting boundaries." The sound of footsteps. After then, a different voice, which was bright and obtrusive, came in. Someone questioned, "Is that Jessica?" As I closed my eyes once more, I asked myself, "Oh my God, is this about the money?" My mother added, "Of course she was there. She thinks she can just cut us off," pretending that I wasn't paying attention to what she was saying. Samantha let out a chuckle. "That's messed up. Ryan was banking on that. Ryan was counting on it as if it were income or something. Just as if it were due." I responded by saying, "That is precisely the issue." I responded to my mother's statement by saying, "No," and she stated, "You were counting on something that was never yours. You are ruining this family." The irregularity in her breathing increased as she said, "You already did. I just stopped paying for it." At this moment I was able to hear the panic which was once again bursting through the entitlement. "You can't leave us behind," she pointed out. I thought about all the evenings that I had gone without things that I wanted, so that they may have what they demanded. What are we supposed to do? I asked myself before thinking about it. When I stayed at home for vacations, they went on vacations. I was responsible for paying for the repairs while Ryan slept until noon. "You have a house," I told her. "The statement that you made, 'You have choices. You have the son you chose,' was not the appropriate one to make." "I never loved you the way I love him," she exclaimed in anger. "He needs me. You never did." The words did not strike the same chord as they would have a year ago or even a month ago. They were unable to break me. "Then this makes sense," I whispered after they released me from my confinement. "You made your choice. Now live with it." She began crying at that moment, her tears being loud and dramatic, the kind that were intended to draw people back for more. She uttered the words, "You are heartless," in between gasps. I waited till the tears slowed down after I had made all of my sacrifices. I pleaded with them. "Don't call me again." As I yanked the phone away from her, she yelled out my name and said, "I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your bank. I'm not responsible for fixing what you refuse to face." I put a stop to the call. With the exception of the hum of the refrigerator, the flat was completely silent. My food was left in the pan, unattended and allowed to cool. The phone was still in my hand while I stood there for a considerable amount of time, and I was half expecting it to ring once again. Indeed it did. Not this time, but text messages. When one follows another. There are accusations of guilt, and threats. In addition, Ryan sent me a message in which he said that I was destroying everything and that my mother was crying because of me. I prevented them from doing so. Every one of them. I sat down at the small table in my kitchen and had a sensation that I hadn't experienced in many years. Peace, not victory, not vengeance of any kind. They had not been able to maintain control, and I had reclaimed my life. After that call, the weeks that followed were quieter than I had anticipated, but not empty quiet. There were no more unexpected demands, and there was no longer any late-night shame that was disguised as worry. My mobile device did not move. At first I continued to check it out of habit, as if my body hadn't yet caught up to the decision that my mind had already made. Relatives who were well-intentioned provided me with a few pieces of information. The house had a heavier feeling to it because it was not supported by my money. The maintenance was put on hold. An unexpected halt was placed on the plans. The fact that life had become unfair was the source of my mother's complaints that things were difficult. Ryan was still trying to make sense of everything. With the exception of one issue, they did not change at all. The item was no longer in my possession. I invested the money that I had been sending each month that I had been sending into my own future. It was not done on impulse, but on purpose. If I had a savings account, it would be in my name. There were objectives that did not require saving anyone. The relief was not shouted or dramatic in any way. Little by little, it manifested itself. The entire night was spent sleeping. In spite of my worry, I prepared food. Rather than preparing myself before opening messages, I ceased doing so. I discovered an old photograph that had been put away in a drawer one evening. Several years ago, James and I were standing outside of the house with his arm around my shoulder and his smile being proud yet subdued. At that moment, I had a realization. In order for me to continue to make sacrifices for myself, he had not safeguarded me. He had shielded me so that I might finally make a more informed decision. It was no longer a source of guilt for me. It is only when you believe that you owe someone access to your life that guilt can be effective. It wasn't me. That was all I had to contribute. This did not make me harsh. I simply let go. It got me to be truthful. Moreover, it has been discovered that honesty is less weighty than obligation. I did not become heartless as a result of my departure. Having it set me free. Love does not depend on how much you give until there is nothing left for a person to receive. Furthermore, establishing limits is not the same thing as retaliation. It is a matter of survival. Even if you find yourself feeling uncomfortably familiar with this scenario, you are not weak, and you are most certainly not alone. There are times when the most courageous thing you can do is to stop paying the price for the decisions that someone else has made. Please share your experience in the comments section if you have ever been forced to choose your own needs over those of your family. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. Even more tales similar to this one are: I drove myself to the hospital with no one to help, alone in labor at 9 centimeters dilated. My husband was MIA. And after 12 calls to my mother-in-law, I got no response. I contacted my mother-in-law 12 times while in labor, but she ignored me because she was at a restaurant with my sister-in-law for their weekly mother-daughter date. My husband missed our baby's delivery. My sister-in-law indicated she didn't care if the baby died when we challenged them. My husband, Thomas, 34M, and I, 32F, had our first child 8 weeks ago. I'm writing this because I can't believe what happened and need independent feedback on whether I overreacted by shutting off Thomas's family. A large downtown Seattle company employs Thomas as a corporate lawyer. He works outrageous hours. Sometimes, 60-75 hours a week, especially with big sales. We knew it was bad timing when I got pregnant because he was closing a huge merger that would take months. However, we were delighted and thought it would work. My family lives in ND. Bellevue, where Thomas's family lives, is 45 minutes distant. His sister Claire is 33F, and his mother Elizabeth is 58F. Elizabeth quit banking early and now does charitable work and spin classes. Claire is a part-time marketing consultant with a flexible schedule. The issue began in my 3rd trimester. Thomas told me one July evening that the transaction was nearing completion. He'd need to work or travel practically constantly for 2 months, until my due date in mid-September. Although he looked unwell, he said this deal would launch his career for the next decade. Telling him I understood. Even though that worried me, I understood. We planned. For hospital transportation, Elizabeth would be my backup. She volunteered instantly when Thomas asked. She promised to keep her phone blaring $24, $7, and drop everything to fetch me. Thomas added her number to my phone favorites. We discussed the proposal at an early August family dinner. Elizabeth seemed happy to be needed. She kept repeating she couldn't wait for her first grandchild's birth. Claire attended that meal. She mentioned that she'd love to help, but she was preparing a large vacation in October and wanted to conserve energy. Elizabeth said Claire shouldn't worry since she had everything handled. I thought it unusual that Claire appeared annoyed by the whole exchange, but I ignored it. My due date was Wednesday, September 20th. Thomas told me he'd be in meetings all day Wednesday for the final merger signing, but he'd have his phone and run out the door if I phoned. The infant had different ideas. I got up at 6:30 a.m. on Friday, September 15. With cramping. I ignored them and continued my morning. Timing contractions by 9:30 a.m. They were strong but erratic. After calling my OB, the nurse urged me to watch them and come in when they were 6 minutes apart. At 11:30 a.m., things picked up. Tensive contractions occurred every 8 minutes. I called Thomas first. He remained silent. I texted him to call me quickly because I was in labor. Then I called Elizabeth. After 5 rings, her phone went to voicemail. I called to say I was in labor and needed her immediately. I called again. Voicemail again. Voicemail. I tried 6 more times in 25 minutes as contractions worsened and grew closer. Every call went to voicemail. I contacted Thomas again. No response. I texted him in uppercase that Elizabeth wasn't replying and I needed him now. No reply. Contractions were 6 minutes apart. Thomas worked hours, leaving me home alone without a car. As I leaned on the kitchen counter, I remembered I had to drive. I grabbed Thomas's garage stored backup car keys with shaky hands. Only because I had to pull over twice due to contractions do I remember the drive. My white knuckles were from squeezing the driving wheel hard. Never before had I made such sounds. I ran a red light without realizing it until I was through the junction. I noticed a police cruiser at a gas station 3 miles from the hospital. Honked as I entered. The cop arrived and I said I was in labor and couldn't drive. Another officer drove my car while he put me in his cruiser with the lights on after calling for backup. They took me to the hospital and within 6 minutes. The ER team rushed me upstairs after one look. Already $9, math room CM dollar dilated. After that, everything happened fast. A nurse told me I was doing well while holding my hand. I screamed for Thomas. I recall the doctor telling me to push. I had our son at $3, C.05, math room, P.M. dollar. I was shivering and crying when the nurse laid him on my chest. Thomas's voice came from the corridor. He entered the room 3 minutes later, breathless, with his tie and shirt untucked. In a conference with his phone on mute, he didn't receive my texts until 3. He ran out of the office and drove madly there. He held me and the baby and apologized repeatedly. He asked his mother's location. I told him I didn't know she never returned my calls. His face transformed completely. He grabbed his phone and called her in the delivery room. She responded first ring. I heard her happy voice on the phone. Thomas asked her where she was and why she hadn't answered my calls. A pause. She then explained she and Claire had gone to their customary Friday lunch place and put her phone on quiet because they were having fun. She assumed I'd call closer to the due date as first infants are often late. She was disconnected by Thomas. He stared at the infant and then at me, attempting to absorb what his mother said. The nurses needed to continue inspecting me and the baby, so we didn't talk about it, but I could see his furious jaw clenching. The hospital received Elizabeth and Claire at 9 p.m. I was in recovery. With shopping bags and perfect hair, they entered. Elizabeth's hair was blown and groomed. Claire appeared to have had her nails done because she kept staring at them while talking. When they saw the baby, Elizabeth cooed about how perfect he was and how sorry she missed the birth. She said traffic was bad and her phone died. Standing behind her, Claire scrolled her phone. She glanced at the baby for 2 seconds before saying I looked sleepy. Thomas got up from my bedside chair. They were told to leave. Elizabeth looked astonished and stated she arrived. Thomas repeated loudly. He demanded that they go because they chose lunch over his wife's safety and his son's delivery. Claire grumbled. I was fine, and the baby was fine, so what was the big deal? First-time moms always overreact to everything. Thomas backed away when Elizabeth sought to touch his arm. They had 30 seconds to depart or he'd contact security. They left. Elizabeth cried in the hall. Claire shouted about Thomas's drama. Our outside hospital security guy asked if we were okay. Thomas closed the door after thanking him. We spent 3 days in the hospital. Elizabeth probably called Thomas 15 times. He remained silent. She texted, asking why he was upset. Claire texted that I was turning Thomas against his family. Thomas blocked both. Thomas sat me down at home to tell me something. He contacted Elizabeth's sister, his aunt in Portland. He learned from the aunt that Elizabeth and Claire had been having Friday lunch for nearly 6 years. They went to the same upscale restaurant every Friday at midday for 3-4 hours, then shopped or got their hair or nails done. The aunt said everyone in the family knew not to bother them on Friday afternoons for mother-daughter time. I asked Thomas if Elizabeth knew when she became my backup. Yes, he said. He told her the baby might arrive any day within 2 weeks of the due date. She said she understood and would help. I reported what happened in our extended family chat. I didn't exaggerate or omit. I explained the timing and asked if I was upset. Divorced from Elizabeth, Thomas's dad contacted immediately to express his horror. Thomas's uncle said Elizabeth was usually selfish, but this was worse. 2 of Thomas's cousins said Elizabeth skipped crucial events too. Claire and Elizabeth departed the group conversation. They started texting me immediately. Elizabeth wrote chapters about her mistake, but I was harsh by telling everyone. Claire texted me that I was overdramatic and trying to steal Thomas from his family. After I didn't react, Claire texted that I was a stranger who didn't understand their family. Thomas installed Ring doorbell cameras and modified our locks. He doubted they wouldn't show up unannounced. 5 days after we returned from the hospital, Elizabeth and Claire arrived. Around $11. 0. Mathrame. $. Hearing screams from the front porch while upstairs with the baby. I saw the Ring notification on my phone. On our doorway. Thomas came to the door and told them to leave. Elizabeth sobbed and longed to see her grandson. Claire yelled at me for manipulating and controlling. Thomas denied them entry and closed the door. They left after 12 more minutes of doorbell ringing on the porch. The noise woke the baby, and I spent an hour putting him back to sleep. Our neighbors brought food. The couple next door delivered lasagna, and said they heard shouting and came to check on us. The family across the street gave us diapers, and suggested to ask if we needed anything. People checking on us helped. Betty, Thomas's Portland aunt, drove up the following weekend. She watched the baby for 3 days while I recovered. She said Elizabeth had been contacting her nonstop to persuade Thomas to forgive her. Betty stated she informed Elizabeth she was on our side and that her actions were inexcusable. I'm writing this because I don't know if I'm unreasonable. Elizabeth constantly trying to contact family. She sent a lengthy email yesterday stating she erred but family should forgive. Claire wrote, I'm tearing the family apart over one mistake. But I keep thinking about driving myself to the hospital while having contractions. I keep thinking about how the baby could have been born in the car or at home with no one there. I keep thinking about how Thomas missed the birth because his mother chose a restaurant reservation over being available like she'd promised. Thomas claims, we're not overreacting and he's done with both of them. I understand his stress. He hardly mentions it. But I can see he's digesting the notion that his mother prioritized a weekly lunch tradition over her first grandchild's birth. So, am I wrong? Should I welcome them back in or keep our distance? Update 1. I was surprised by the response to my first post. Thanks to all who responded. I realized I wasn't crazy after reading the comments. Lots has happened since I posted. Thomas and I agreed to meet with Elizabeth and Claire one time to set limits the day after my announcement. We had Thomas's Aunt Betty here for support. Coffee shops in neutral territory were where we met. Elizabeth looked like she'd cried for days. Being there annoyed Claire. Thomas explained the terms while we sat. He said we needed to know why they did what they did before reuniting. Elizabeth immediately cried and blamed herself. Claire checked her phone. Thomas bluntly asked Elizabeth why she put her phone on silent when I could go into labor any day. Elizabeth glanced at Claire and Thomas. Fridays were their only consistent time together, therefore she and Claire valued them. She told herself that first infants are always late and that I'd definitely go into labor on or after my Wednesday due date. I asked her why she didn't notify us. She wasn't available on Friday so we could change plans. That stumped her. She maintained that it would be all right. Then Claire spoke. She remarked Elizabeth and she revered Friday afternoons. She said they'd been doing it for 4 years, and that was the only thing that got Claire through her divorce. I should have avoided Friday labor, she said. Thomas inquired about her sincerity. Claire stated she meant it. She stated the pregnancy had disrupted enough family occasions and was inconvenient timing. She tired of everything being about the baby. Betty asked Claire to define that. Claire claimed that since I got pregnant, every family event was about me and the baby. She stated Elizabeth used to spend more time with her, but now everything were about grandmotherhood. She said my early labor destroyed her and Elizabeth's day off. I asked Claire whether she understood that I or the baby could have perished. She shrugged, saying hospitals cater to that. She stated I got to the hospital fine, so she didn't understand. Thomas rose. He informed Claire she was sick and should prioritize. Claire said he'd changed since marrying me and that I'd turned him against his family. Elizabeth tried to calm everyone. She suggested we take a break and try again in a few months. Betty said not for months. She claimed Elizabeth's daughter's lunch date versus infant safety attitude said all about her morals. Betty was a cruel elderly woman without children, Claire said. She couldn't grasp family ties. We departed. Thomas was quiet the whole way home. He immediately ordered more security cameras for the backyard and side gates on his computer when we returned home. He doubted Claire. Elizabeth called Thomas from an unblocked number while I fed the baby that night. He replied on speaker. She stated she needed to tell us but was scared. Thomas inquired about her topic. After the coffee shop encounter, Elizabeth reviewed her September 15th phone records at home. She stated she checked my call timestamps. She said her phone wasn't silent. She stated Claire took her phone and turned it on airplane mode at lunch. Thomas wondered why Claire did that. Elizabeth stated Claire confessed when she approached her. Claire said she'd seen my calls on Elizabeth's phone when she was in the restaurant toilet. Claire grabbed the phone and put it on airplane mode. She removed call notifications before Elizabeth returned to the table. Elizabeth said Claire said she did it because she was tired of my getting attention. She said Claire had complained for months about Elizabeth's pregnancy limiting her availability. She claimed Claire wanted to teach me not to assume Elizabeth would always be available. I was speechless. Thomas asked Elizabeth why she hadn't told us sooner. Elizabeth stated she only found out because she never questioned if her phone was on quiet as she remembered. Betty's words made her realize Claire had been acting unusual all day, so she checked after the meeting. Thomas asked Elizabeth whether she knew that Claire purposefully endangered me and the baby. Elizabeth could scarcely speak from crying, saying she knew. She said she and Claire had fought for 2 hours. She said Claire laughed and said I and the baby were okay. Elizabeth was unhappy over what? Thomas informed Elizabeth, this didn't affect our relationship. He stated she still agreed to be my backup but went to lunch anyhow. It was Elizabeth's failure to be available when promised that caused the problem, not Claire's behavior. Elizabeth asked for babysitting. She admitted she'd erred, but she was his grandmother. Thomas declined. He suggested she needed time and space to think out why she'd allowed Claire's behavior for so long. His call ended. Thomas's dad called 2 days later. He said Elizabeth called crying and told him everything. He stated he drove to Elizabeth's and confronted Claire. He stated Claire instructed him to leave it alone and everyone was overreacting. He stated he warned Claire to stay away from us or face legal penalties. Betty contacted that weekend to say she'd heard from other family members that Claire had been posting on social media about Thomas and I withholding her nephew from his grandma over a misunderstanding. She uploaded screenshots of her apology text to Thomas. She removed her slurs and felt the situation was overdone. Thomas's relative called Claire out on her posts via comments. My initial Reddit post was shared. Claire deleted everything and concealed her accounts. We believe things were calming. One night at $2. 0 Mathroom. A.M. Our Ring doorbell camera detected front porch motion. I heard the alarm on my phone while feeding the baby. Claire was on our porch when I checked the camera. She stood gazing at the door. I awoke Thomas. Both of us viewed his phone's camera. Claire turned and walked back to her car after about 6 minutes. She drove away from our house after 12 more minutes in the automobile. Thomas reported the incident the next morning via non-emergency police. The officer who gathered the information advised us to document and consider a restraining order if it continued. Thomas sent himself Ring footage via email and kept it in a folder. That weekend, Betty drove up again. She retired after 20 years in mental nursing and worried Claire would break down. Elizabeth's actions, social media posts, and overnight visit to our house were warning flags, she stated. She said compulsive attention seekers like Claire might become explosive when they feel disconnected from their primary source of validation. Thomas installed house-wide motion sensor lights. Our neighbors inquired about our well-being. We told them we had family troubles and wanted to be careful. The neighboring husband offered Thomas his cell number and said to call anytime, day or night. Although Claire hasn't spoken since that night, Elizabeth keeps contacting Thomas to sit down again. She says Claire is her daughter and can't be cut off. But she wants to stay in our life. Thomas has ignored her texts. I expected to feel better once we knew the facts. I feel numb. I keep staring at the infant and thinking about how Claire made Elizabeth ignore my calls. I keep wondering what may have gone wrong on the hospital drive. Thomas barely slept. He checks the cameras several times a night, even when there are no warnings. He claims he should not have trusted his mother with such a vital matter. Betty advised us to quit blaming ourselves and focus on family. Elizabeth and Claire made their own decisions, not ours, she remarked. She said our only responsibility is to raise the baby safely and lovingly. People wondered what occurred after the initial post, so I'm updating. I wish I had better news. Wish I could say we sat down and collaborated. Unfortunately, Some things are unsolvable. Some things reveal people's true selves. He gave her 7 minutes. She requested entry. He declined. She stood on the porch and told him everything while I watched through the house's camera. She said she had gone through Claire's room while Claire was out 4 days after Claire arrived at our house at 2 a.m. A notebook was under Claire's bed. She said. Claire wrote about the baby in the notebook. Elizabeth found the entries disturbing. Claire wrote about how the baby ruined everything. She wrote that if the baby hadn't been born, things could return to normal. She wrote of ways to make the baby disappear so Elizabeth wouldn't obsess about being a grandma. Thomas inquired if Claire had threatened our son. Elizabeth agreed. She stated she confronted Claire about the journal that night. Claire yelled at Elizabeth for overreacting. Their fight was yelling. Claire stated Elizabeth picked us over her daughter. Elizabeth advised Claire to get help. Claire left with a bag. Elizabeth reported 4 weeks without Claire's reply. Claire didn't return calls or texts. Claire didn't answer the door when Elizabeth drove to her apartment many times. Elizabeth reported Claire missing to the police, but they stated she was an adult and there was no proof of criminal play, so they couldn't help. Thomas questioned Elizabeth why she waited 4 weeks to tell us. Elizabeth hoped Claire would return so they could treat her. She was afraid we wouldn't let her see the baby if she told us. Her fear of Claire's actions prompted her to inform us now. Thomas showed me the discussion ring footage inside. We promptly reported the incident to the police. Our 2 a.m. porch footage of Claire was shown to them. We informed them. Elizabeth's notepad comment. The officer suggested a restraining order and noted it in the system. Next day, we filed a restraining order against Claire at the courtroom. The judge issued a temporary order and scheduled a 3-week hearing. Our address was required on the form. Thomas was frightened. But the clerk claimed it was necessary. It happened 5 days after we sought the restraining order. It was 3 a.m. My kid cried and I got up to nurse him. The nursery was dark save for the little bulb when I heard something outside. It sounded like distant shouting or conversation. I opened Ring on my phone. The front porch camera caught Claire at our door. She was shouting, but her distance from the microphone obscured the sounds. Her mouth moved and arms waved. She looked wild. She had messy hair and slept in her clothes. I hurried to our bedroom and woke Thomas. He accessed the camera stream on his phone. We observed Claire vanish from the front porch camera. Thomas turned to the backyard cam. Nothing. He switched to side gate camera. She was trying to open the gate. Lock held. Thomas dialed 911. He informed them that someone was trying to break into our house and that she was under restraining order. The operator indicated police were arriving. We heard glass break. From the nursery. Thomas hurried down the hall. I carried the baby and followed him. The nursery window broke. There was glass everywhere. Claire threw a brick or rock through it. The shadows obscured her going through the window. Thomas yelled that she leave. She was halfway through the window, bleeding from the glass. She screamed. She said we stole her mother, everything was good before the baby, and she needed to mend it. Thomas pulled her arm through the glass to force her out. She screamed and fought him. She had blood everywhere from her injured hands. I left the room with the infant, and called 911 from the corridor. She was inside the home, I said. I heard more yelling and struggling. I heard sirens. The police moved up the street. Claire must have heard them because the yelling turned to tears. Thomas had pushed Claire through the window and held her on the nursery floor when the officers arrived. She was crying, wounded, and confused. Officers seized control. I remembered one from September 15th when he drove me to the hospital. He inquired about our health. Thomas agreed, but she had to be arrested. Claire was handcuffed. Still crying, she wanted her mother back. The blood from glass cuts prompted an ambulance call. Paramedics bandaged her hands while she was handcuffed. Officers stated she'd be guarded in the hospital and jail. They required us to provide formal statements at the station in the morning. While we boarded up the damaged window with plywood, one officer lingered. They left as the sun rose. Neither of us slept. We sat in the living room with a baby and didn't chat. Elizabeth rang Thomas at 8 a.m. Police contacted her as Claire's emergency contact. She was crazy. She inquired about our safety. We were all right physically, but Claire was going to jail, stated Thomas. Elizabeth stated she feared this might happen. She stated she should have told us about the notebook earlier. She should have notified us immediately, remarked Thomas. He claimed she endangered our son by waiting. He refused to hear from her again. His call ended. We visited the police later that morning. Presented our statements. Claire was charged with attempted burglary, criminal trespass, and restraining order violation, according to the detective. Given her mental state, he predicted a psychiatric evaluation. He stated the district attorney will discuss legal processes. The house was deserted when we returned. Disaster continued in the nursery. The floor was covered in blood and glass. After seeing us pull in, our neighbors came over. They helped Thomas clean as I brought the baby to our bedroom. The neighbor couple said they heard sirens and panicked all night. They requested we notify them of any needs. That afternoon, Betty called. She said the family told her. She advised us to leave the house. She told us to pack bags and come to Portland to stay with her as long as needed. With so much trauma in the house, she suggested we needed room to process. We drove to Portland the next day. We arrived a week ago. The infant is okay. Thomas is suffering. He barely eats. He routinely checks his phone for police updates. He regrets not splitting off his family sooner. Betty sits with him and says it's not his fault. He couldn't have known Claire would do this, she says. Mental illness can emerge years later. She warns. He can only focus on keeping us secure, she says. The detective called yesterday. He said Claire saw a hospital psychiatrist. She was incompetent to stand trial, according to the psychiatrist. A long-term psychiatric center will treat her. The criminal charges would be halted awaiting her treatment. He said. He stated the restraining order stands. Elizabeth keeps calling Thomas. Not responding. She's called Betty too. She needed to realize that her daughter is sick and her grandson's family needs distance, Betty said. Elizabeth understood, but she's lost both her children and doesn't know how to deal. Betty stated Elizabeth should consult a professional, not us. Thomas's father apologized for everything by phone. He believed he failed Claire as a father, by not noticing the indications earlier. He admitted to failing Thomas by not shielding him from his mother's problems. Thomas said that wasn't his job. His dad wants to meet the baby when we're ready, if we're okay, Thomas answered. Maybe eventually. We're going back to our house tomorrow. He hired a company to replace the nursery window and paint the room. He wants anything that reminds us of that night gone. He's also installing a full security system with cameras on every door and window and police-connected alarms. No idea what's next. Claire may never recover. I doubt we'll ever feel safe at home again. Thomas may never forgive his mother for not alerting us sooner. I know we'll prioritize our son. We'll safeguard him as he grows up. We will ensure that no one from Thomas's side of the family hurts us again. Final update. I wasn't going to update, but folks have been texting for closure. Here it is. We moved. The only time we returned to Seattle was to pack. Thomas listed the house 3 weeks after we returned from Portland and sold it in 4 days. We lost money on the transaction to get out soon, but neither of us cared. We bought a smaller Portland house 12 minutes from Betty. It's safe and in a friendly area. Our neighbors have kids. Our neighbor has a son-aged child. Feels different from Seattle. Feels manageable. Thomas took a job break. His firm was accommodating. They would maintain his position for 7 months and let him work remotely when ready. Early December saw him work from home part-time. He believes employment helps him forget what occurred. Claire remains in mental care. We obtain updates from the DA. The doctors claim she's been diagnosed with various problems I won't disclose here to avoid armchair diagnosis and stigma. What matters is her treatment. Despite the ongoing criminal accusations, the DA stated her mental health suggests a plea offer with continued therapy rather than jail time. We told the DA we're good as long as the restraining order continues in place and she can't visit us. Elizabeth stopped phoning after moving. Betty informed her we'd moved from Seattle and weren't telling Thomas's relatives. Elizabeth said she understood and respected our choice in a late December email. She said she was going to therapy to understand her position. She stated she'd be open to touch again if we were ready, but she wouldn't push. Thomas didn't reply. Thomas's dad respects. He texts us every few weeks to check in. Thomas provides quick updates. His dad sent a Christmas card with a gift card and a note saying he hopes to meet his grandson when we're ready. We haven't decided, but Thomas suggests next year. Extended families formed camps. Some think we overreacted by moving and isolating everyone. Some argue we didn't go far enough and should have charged Elizabeth for delayed notebook disclosure. Thomas only communicates with Betty and his dad after leaving the family group chat. My family celebrated Thanksgiving outside. My mom helped with the baby for 3 weeks. I could breathe for the first time since everything transpired. She asked few inquiries. She assisted me and let me speak. The child is 5 months old. Healthy and reaching his goals. He doesn't know what happened. His parents, Great Aunt Betty, and peaceful Portland house are all he knows. We want it that way. People keep wondering if we'll reconcile with Elizabeth, or let Claire back in if she's well. No, indeed. Thomas and I discussed it extensively. We concluded risk wasn't worth it. Even if Claire stabilizes and Elizabeth resolves her concerns, the damage is done. They're untrustworthy. After seeing their actions, we won't put our youngster in danger. Some find that harsh. Others believe families should be given second opportunities. Here's my opinion. Your family should protect you. When family threatens you, makes you drive yourself to the hospital in childbirth, or breaks into your house at night, they stop being family. People you used to know hurt you. That thought challenges Thomas more than I do. Raised to value blood ties above all else. Relearned what family means. He now believes family is built, not born. He says, our family is us, our son, Betty, and his dad. If he can find a safe place, that's enough. We're not going back to Seattle. We're not maintaining relationships with people who enabled what happened or who think we should get over it. And we're not placing ourselves in situations where we have to be on guard. We're choosing peace over obligation. The Portland house is quiet. We have a small circle of trusted people and safe routines. The baby's room has white walls, blue curtains, and a window that looks out onto a tree. There's no broken glass, blood on the floor, or history of harm. Thomas sometimes wonders what his life would be like if he had seen the warning signs earlier. If he had known that his mother's need to please Claire was toxic, and that Claire's jealousy was more than sibling rivalry. He feels stupid for not seeing it. He's not stupid, and I tell him you can't prepare for people you love to hurt you or when someone will cross a line you didn't know existed. Betty says we did everything right, we set boundaries and enforced them. We protected our son when it mattered most. We can Argus Reese's man. We can port place laugh, we can place laugh. She says, good parents do that. Not sure if we accomplished everything right. I know we did our duty. I know we selected our son above others. That's the update. We're good, healing, going forward, and doing it without our attackers. Story 2. During home renovations, I found pre-signed separation papers and a strange note from my husband hidden beneath our floorboards. The truth left me questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Yesterday started like any other Thursday. We've been married for 6 years and together for almost 10. I'm Sarah, 32F, and I've always thought we had something special. James is caring, attentive, and makes me feel valued. He plans surprise dates, brings home my favorite desserts when I've had a bad day, and texts me random jokes to make me smile. We've been trying for 7 months to have children. We bought our first house 4 years ago, a small but charming 1,940 seconds bungalow that needed some work. Since I left my marketing job 9 months ago, James earns enough at his engineering firm that we agreed I could take time off to make our house ours. Yesterday, I decided to refinish the original hardwood floors in our upstairs hallway. The previous owners had carpeted them, and I'd been putting it off because it seemed daunting. I started by pulling up the carpet in the far corner, where I noticed a noticeable difference. One board was slightly raised, and when I pried it up, I found a metal lockbox tucked into the floor joists. It wasn't locked, but inside were legal documents, and a sealed envelope with James's handwriting that said read when needed. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now, but finding a hidden box beneath our floors made my heart race. I opened the envelope first and found a letter clearly written by James to himself. It made my blood run cold. James, when you read this, your suspicions were right. Your loving marriage with Sarah has fallen apart. I don't know what happened. Maybe she found someone who makes her happier. Maybe you weren't enough. Maybe the love faded. All those memories you treasured with her will have to be forgotten. She's leaving or you're making her leave. You stupid, worthless, delusional fool. You never deserved her in the first place. You should have known this would happen eventually. Or did she betray you? She promised to be faithful, but she let another man into her life and bed. She chose him over you. Let her go. Forgive her. Your anger will destroy you. James, you'll survive this. My hands shook when I set the letter down. Listen to that song from our first date to remember happier times. Then get some sleep tomorrow, hit the gym, call your lawyer, and start rebuilding. I then looked at the legal documents. They were separation papers prepared by a law firm I'd never heard of, with both our names filled in except for signatures. I sat on the half floor, surrounded by carpet tacks and dust, staring at these papers that ended my marriage. That morning, James kissed me for a long time before leaving, told me he couldn't wait to see my floor progress, and promised to pick up dinner on his way home. Why did these papers exist? Why was this letter hidden beneath our floors? When had James written this? Had he been planning to leave me all along? Was this just a backup plan? My mind raced through every conversation, ever. James is everything I wanted in a companion, therefore I didn't understand why this was coming from. James has always been emotionally restrained. He never talks about his feelings, so when we started dating, I had to adjust to his communication style. Instead of long, deep conversations about emotions, he showed his love through consistent, thoughtful gestures. The letter's tone changed from resigned sadness to blistering self-hatred to strange calm acceptance. It sounded nothing like the James I knew, who was confident, level-headed, and secure. I tried calling him at work, but he didn't answer. I texted asking when he'd be home, trying to sound normal. He replied he'd be home by 7, followed by a heart emoji. So casual. So normal. While I sat surrounded by evidence that he had prepared for our marriage to end, I spent the afternoon in a daze. I gave up on the floor project and paced around the house, looking for signs of unhappiness in his eyes I might have missed. We looked happy in every picture and in love. Around 6:30, I took the box downstairs and put it on our coffee table. I waited on the couch. I was too confused and shocked to cry when I heard his key in the door at 7. He called out my name as usual, but I didn't answer. He entered the living room with takeout bags, his smile disappearing when he saw the box on the table. He froze, dropping the takeout bags on the floor. We stared at each other for several seconds, his face drained of color, and I saw pure terror in his eyes for the first time. I asked him to explain the box, papers, and letter, and if he wanted to leave me. If he thought I was cheating, I asked why he would hide something like this instead of talking to me. James sank into the armchair across from me and wouldn't look at me. After what seemed like forever, he started talking. He said he created the contingency plan 7 months ago after several triggering events. Over dinner, his father, Richard, casually mentioned how James was always anxious, and how they tried to toughen him up. James tensed beside me but said nothing. Later, when we were alone, I asked James about his childhood. For the first time, he opened up about his father's unpredictable temper, and his mother's emotional distance. James told me he learned early to hide his emotions and project confidence even when he felt insecure. His parents' divorce when he was 13 was preceded by years of fighting and his mother's affair, which his father detailed in excruciating detail. His parents' marriage unraveling, despite appearing solid to outsiders, planted a seed of doubt about relationships that never fully went away. I realized our entire relationship has existed alongside his unspoken fear that history would repeat itself and that I would leave him for someone else like his mother. I was most moved by James's explanation of why he hid the box under the floor. When he was 14, shortly after the divorce, he found a similar box in his mother's closet while looking for a baseball glove. Inside were letters between his mother and the man she left her father for, letters from 3 years before she left. The floor hiding place wasn't random, it was directly related to his childhood trauma. He created his contingency plan and hid it like his mother hid her affair. In his anxious mind, he was preparing for a betrayal he subconsciously expected to occur. At James's request, I attended his therapy appointment yesterday. His therapist explained that James has relationship anxiety due to childhood attachment issues, trauma complicated by obsessive thought patterns. The Reddit forums likely triggered and reinforced these anxieties, creating a fear feedback loop that led to the contingency plan. I asked about the self-loathing language in his letter. The therapist said it represents his internalized voice of criticism, likely modeled after his father's treatment of him. James nodded in agreement, unable to speak as tears fell from his face. On the drive home, James told me something that broke my heart. We sat in the car in our driveway for almost an hour as he shared more fears and anxieties he's hidden from me throughout our relationship, like how he checks my phone when I'm in the shower to calm his anxiety. How he rehearses what to say if I tell him I met someone else. How he sometimes drives home during lunch to make sure everything is normal. I'm still processing all of this. I feel heartbreak for James, anger that he had so much from me, and guilt that I never noticed his struggles. We've agreed to weekly couples therapy along with James's individual sessions. His therapist recommended someone who specializes in rebuilding trust and improving communication. The floor project remains unfinished. I can't bring myself to work on it anymore. The exposed section with the missing board is covered with a rug. James offered to hire someone to finish it, but I think we should finish it together when we're ready. For now, we're taking things day by day. After decades of hiding his anxieties, I can see how hard it is for James to be more open about them. I still love him, and I'm committed to working through this together if possible, but I know we have a long road ahead. For the first time in our relationship, we're seeing each other fully, flaws and fears included. Update 2. Much has changed since I found James's contingency plan 4 months ago. I want to thank everyone who shared their experiences in the comments of my previous posts. Reading about similar situations helped me feel less alone during this difficult time. The biggest change is that we've learned James has had undiagnosed OCD and anxiety for most of his life. After several sessions, his therapist identified the patterns: intrusive thoughts about me leaving, compulsive checking, hidden preparation rituals, and extreme distress. When the box was discovered, this diagnosis was a relief for both of us because it gave James a name and framework and opened up more treatment options. His daily anxiety levels have decreased since starting medication and therapy. Our couples therapist has been helping us develop new communication patterns. James is learning to express his fears instead of hiding them, and I'm learning to reassure him without feeling smothered by his anxiety. Each evening, we have a structured, supportive check-in time to discuss concerns. Last month, James's therapist helped him realize the full extent of his father's emotional abuse. Richard had convinced James that his mother's affair was James' fault. James's fears about our marriage were rooted in this devastating belief that if James had been a better son, his mother wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere. After this revelation, James decided to set stronger boundaries with his father. We had dinner with both his parents separately. His mother apologized for how her choices had affected James and admitted she should have protected him more from Richard's manipulation after the divorce. His father's dinner was more difficult. When James calmly explained how Richard's words and actions had hurt him, Richard became defensive and dismissive. James kept his cool when Richard told him to man up and stop blaming his childhood for imaginary problems, but he decided to take a break from his father until Richard admits his mistakes. On a positive note, James has stopped browsing the infidelity and relationship subreddits. His therapist showed him how these forums were triggering his OCD cycles and anxieties. He's found healthier online mental health communities instead. 7 weeks ago, we returned to the floor project. James insisted on replacing the floorboard where the box was hidden. We discussed having children while working on the floors. Before all this happened, we'd been trying to conceive, but we've decided to pause those efforts until James feels more stable with his treatment and we've had more time to strengthen our relationship. My part-time contract job with my former employer was unrelated to our situation, but I was starting to miss the creative challenges of marketing work, and it's been healthy to have something outside the house to focus on. His therapist agreed that adding parenting stress right now could overwhelm our progress. Last week, James's brother Tom visited from across the country. Tom is 6 years older and had moved away for college when James was still dealing with their parents' divorce. He was shocked to learn about James's experiences and their lasting impact. Tom told me unusual family stories, including how their father had been paranoid during his marriage to their mother, accusing her of affairs years before she had one. This was uncomfortable, but important. James could see how he had unconsciously adopted some of his father's worst tendencies despite desperately trying to be different. Last month, I worked late on a project with a male colleague and James's anxiety spiked dramatically. He didn't accuse me, but I could see the fear in his eyes when I came home each night. Instead of hiding it, he talked to me about it and worked through it with his therapist. This experience has changed us both. James is more authentic than the carefully controlled person I married. There's vulnerability where there was a polished facade and honesty where there were secrets. It's like meeting a deeper version of the man I've loved all along. I'm more assertive about my needs, and more aware of subtle signs of trouble. James is learning that exposing his fears doesn't make them come true. The hidden box forced us to confront issues that might have festered in our marriage for years. Update 3. It's been exactly 7 months since I tore up our hallway carpet and found the hidden box. This will be my final update as our life has settled into a new normal that feels both familiar and completely different. James continues his therapy and medication, which has made a huge difference in his daily life. He describes it as the constant background noise in my brain finally being turned down. He still has anxious days, but he has better coping mechanisms. James said, "I'm going to be a different kind of father than mine was. His therapist has been helping him overcome parenting fears and break generational emotional damage. We've kept in touch with James's father, who denies his actions, but Richard recently started dating a woman who required him to attend a few therapy sessions as a relationship requirement. He reluctantly went, but it seems to have sparked some self-reflection. During our last brief visit, he awkwardly admitted that he may have been hard on James as a child. It's not the full accountability James deserves, but it's more than we expected. James's relationship with his mother has deepened. She's become an unexpected source of support, checking in on his mental health progress and sharing her therapy journey after the divorce, which has helped James see that healing is possible even decades after trauma. Our house is finally finished, with the kitchen backsplash installed last weekend. It feels like ours now. Built on honesty, rather than secrets. We've talked about the symbolism of tearing everything down and rebuilding it stronger. The biggest change is in our communication. James no longer hides his anxiety. When it arises, he tells me, "I'm having a hard day and need reassurance." Sometimes it's more specific. "When you mentioned your colleague's divorce, my mind started spinning worst-case scenarios about us." I realized I had been walking on eggshells around James's emotions even before discovering the box, intuitively sensing his anxiety but never addressing it. Now, I don't hesitate to point out when his OCD patterns seem to be intensifying or when his father's critical voice seems to be influencing his self-perception. Our first real vacation since everything happened was a weekend trip to the coast last month. While walking on the beach, James told me that for the first time in his adult life, he's not constantly waiting for disaster. He's learning to live in the present. On that trip, we scattered the ashes of his letter to himself in the ocean as a ritual to release his fear. I watched the paper dissolve into the waves and felt closure. Our marriage isn't perfect. We still have disagreements and challenges. The pregnancy has brought new anxieties for both of us. The box beneath our floor forced us to confront the hidden cracks in our relationship, which was painful but necessary. What looked like betrayal turned out to be deep-seated fear. By addressing that fear directly, we've built something more resilient than before. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had refinished a different floor or never noticed the slightly raised board. James's anxiety and trauma might have shaped our relationship for years or decades in ways we didn't understand. Finding the box was the worst and best thing that happened to our marriage. It broke the illusion of perfect understanding but allowed something more authentic to grow. Thank you to those who followed our story and offered advice and support. Your shared experiences helped us through the darkest moments. Bringing secrets into the light is terrifying but transformative for those facing similar relationship challenges. As we prepare to become parents, I'm grateful that our child will grow up with a father who's confronted his past, and a mother who's learned that real love sometimes means uncovering difficult truths. We'll confront whatever comes next without secrets under the floorboards.